Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something that, well, it really shapes our financial world, even if we don't always notice it day to day. We're talking about the business cycle.
Mhm.
You've probably heard the term, maybe on the news, but we want to go a bit deeper than the headlines today, really get into the nuts and bolts of these economic ups and downs.
That's right. I think a lot of people have this general sense, okay, economies grow, sometimes they shrink. But our aim today is to, well, give it some structure. How does it actually work?
Okay.
And we'll be leaning quite a bit on the insights from Bindu Kanal's work on the business cycle. It provides a really solid framework.
Good. So let's start right at the beginning. What is a business cycle, really? Beyond just, booms and busts.
Well, at its core, it's about these recurring ups and downs, these fluctuations in the overall economic activity, not just one sector, but the whole picture.
Okay, the big picture.
Yeah, and Kanal uses Paul Samuelson's definition, which I think is quite helpful. He described it as a swing in total national output, income, and employment,
Swing.
usually lasting for a period of 2 to 10 years, marked by widespread expansion or contraction in most sectors of the economy. So it's broad, and it has this time dimension to it.
Right, 2 to 10 years. That's quite a range. It suggests they aren't exactly regular.
Oh, definitely not. Canal really emphasizes that point. Think of it like a wave, this sort of wave-like oscillation he talks about, often linked to how capitalist systems work, leading to these cycles of, well, booms and depressions.
So it's almost built into the system.
In a way, yes. The dynamism itself seems to generate these patterns. But, and this is crucial, no two cycles are identical. They vary in how long they last, how high the peaks go, how low the troughs dip. It's irregular.
Got it. Not like clockwork then. More unpredictable rhythm.
Exactly. Maybe like jazz, as you said earlier, rather than a metronome.
Okay, so these irregular waves, Canal breaks them down into four phases, right? Let's maybe walk through those. Starting with the one everyone likes, expansion. What's happening there?
Right? Expansion. Or you might hear it called prosperity, or the upswing. This is when things are generally looking up. You see employment rising, people's incomes going up, businesses producing more stuff,
Output increases.
output increases, exactly. And often, prices might start to nudge upwards too. Canal notes that this phase often kicks off when there's some slack in the economy. Factories aren't running 24/7. There are people available to hire.
So there's room to grow.
Precisely. And as demand picks up, businesses sell more, profits tend to rise. And that initial profit boost is key.
Because that makes businesses feel more optimistic, more willing to, say, invest or hire.
Yes, exactly. Optimism grows. They think, okay, things are looking good, let's expand. So they invest in new machinery, maybe build a new plant, hire more workers. Banks are usually happier to lend money during this time too. It feeds on itself,
Right, a positive feedback loop. More investment means more jobs, more income, which means more spending.
which encourages more production and investment and so on. Canal calls it a self-reinforcing process. It gathers momentum.
But, well, trees don't grow to the sky, right? Eventually, that expansion has to slow down or turn. That brings us to the next phase, recession, or the upper turning point, as Canal puts it. What starts to happen then?
Yeah, the turning point. It's interesting because Canal suggests the boom itself contains the seeds of recession.
How so?
Well, think about it. As the economy gets really busy, resources, maybe skilled labor, raw materials, they can become scarce. Costs for businesses start to rise.
Okay.
Interest rates might also creep up because everyone's trying to borrow money to fund expansion. And maybe the most critical thing, sometimes consumer spending just doesn't quite keep up with the massive increase in production businesses have ramped up.
Ah, so companies are making more stuff than people are buying at that moment. Inventories pile up.
Could be. Or the rate of increase slows down. Either way, profit margins might get squeezed. Businesses look ahead and maybe don't see the same rapid growth continuing. Expectations shift.
And that dampens the enthusiasm for more big investments or hiring sprees.
Exactly. So investment plans get scaled back, hiring slows, maybe stops. This is that peak, the upper turning point, where the forces pushing the economy down start to outweigh the forces pushing it up. It's like cresting a hill.
And after cresting the hill, you head down, which leads into the tougher phase, contraction or depression, the downswing.
This is characterized by a general fall-off in economic activity. Production goes down, unemployment goes up, incomes fall, demand weakens. Sometimes prices might even start to drop.
That sounds pretty widespread.
It usually is. Canal mentions things like bank deposits might decrease, getting credit becomes harder, banks get nervous, businesses and people are less keen to borrow. You see factories closing, construction stopping, mass unemployment in severe cases.
And just like the expansion could feed on itself, this sounds like it can spiral downwards too.
Absolutely. It's often self-reinforcing in a negative way. People lose jobs, so they have less income, so they spend less.
Which means less demand for businesses.
So they cut back production even more, maybe lay off more workers. It can be a difficult cycle to break out of.
But it does eventually bottom out, right? There's a floor somewhere. Which brings us to the last phase, revival or recovery, the lower turning point. How does the economy start climbing back up?
Well, Canal suggests it often starts subtly. After a period where people have put off purchases, things just start to wear out.
Right, your washing machine finally gives up the ghost, or the car needs replacing necessity.
Exactly. Even if confidence is low, some replacement demand starts to trickle in. And because businesses have cut back so much, maybe they have idle factories and workers.
So even a small increase in orders can make a difference.
It can, especially to profits initially. If you can produce a bit more without huge new costs because you have that spare capacity, profits can jump disproportionately. That can spark a little bit of optimism.
The first glimmer of hope.
Maybe. And that might encourage a little bit of new investment, perhaps hiring back a few workers. It's the start of the cumulative process upwards again. Demand rises slightly, investment picks up, employment grows, incomes improve.
Leading to more demand, and we're slowly heading back towards expansion. It really is a cycle. Okay, we've got the phases down, but why does this happen? What drives these shifts? What are the causes?
The million-dollar question. And economists have, let's just say, many different theories. It's complex, but Canal gives us two broad categories to think about: external factors and internal factors.
Okay, external factors, things happening outside the normal day-to-day economy, like big shocks.
Exactly. Exogenous factors, they're sometimes called. Canal lists things like wars, political upheavals, big jumps in oil prices, discovery of major new resources, game-changing technological innovations. Even things like weather patterns, or historically, things like sunspots were considered.
Wow, sunspots. Okay, maybe less emphasis on that now, but things like tech breakthroughs or oil price shocks, definitely. Big, often unpredictable jolts.
And then you have the internal or endogenous factors. These are things within the economic system itself that tend to make it cyclical.
Okay, what sort of internal forces are we talking about?
Canal points to theories that focus on components of aggregate demand and supply. One really important one is the accelerator multiplier theory.
Accelerator multiplier. Okay, break that down a bit.
Okay, so the multiplier effect is the idea that an initial change in spending, like government investment, leads to a larger overall change in national income because that money gets spent and respent.
Right, the ripple effect.
The accelerator part relates investment to changes in output. If demand for, say, cars suddenly jumps up rapidly,
Car companies don't just make a few more cars.
well, they do. But if they expect demand to stay high or keep growing, they'll invest heavily in new factories and equipment to accelerate their production capacity. So high growth stimulates a disproportionate amount of investment,
Got it. So rapid growth leads to lots of investment.
which, through the multiplier, fuels even more growth. It's another one of those feedback loops pushing the expansion phase.
But what puts the brakes on that internally?
Well, eventually, the economy hits capacity limits, right? You run out of workers to hire, factories are running flat out, the rate of growth has to slow down. And when growth slows, that big incentive for massive new investment weakens. The accelerator effect reverses. Less investment slows the economy further, potentially tipping it into recession. And the whole thing works in reverse on the way down, too, eventually stabilizing things.
So the very pace of growth and investment can create these cycles internally. That makes sense. Canal also mentions shifts in aggregate demand and aggregate supply.
Yeah, these are sort of broader categories. Aggregate demand is just the total demand for everything in the economy. If consumers suddenly get pessimistic and stop spending, or businesses cut investment, or government spending changes, or exports drop, that shifts aggregate demand and can cause a downturn.
So changes in overall spending behavior.
Right. And aggregate supply is the total amount businesses are willing to produce. A sudden supply shock, like a huge spike in energy costs, makes it harder or more expensive for businesses to produce things. That can reduce aggregate supply, potentially leading to stagnation or recession, maybe even inflation at the same time.
Okay, so lots of potential drivers, both external jolts and these internal mechanisms. And these cycles, well, they clearly have big impacts. What are the main negative effects Canal highlights?
Well, the most obvious ones during a contraction are rising unemployment, which causes real hardship for people, and falling output. The whole economy produces less, which means, a lower standard of living overall.
Not good. But even the good times, the expansion aren't always perfect, are they? Kanal mentioned inflation.
That's a key point. Yeah, during strong expansions, demand can sometimes run ahead of supply, pushing prices up across the board. That's inflation, and it erodes the value of people's savings and incomes.
So unemployment in the downturn, inflation in the upturn. It sounds like instability itself is a problem.
It absolutely is. Kanal points out that the general uncertainty created by these fluctuations isn't great for the economy. Businesses might hesitate on long-term investments, consumers might put off big purchases.
Mhm.
Just makes planning harder for everyone.
Which logically leads to the question, can we do anything about it? Can we avoid these cycles or at least smooth them out? Does Kanal offer any hope there?
Well, yes, to some extent. He notes that since Keynes, our understanding of macroeconomics has improved a lot. We now have policy tools specifically designed to try and manage these cycles.
Like monetary policy from central banks.
Exactly. Adjusting interest rates, managing the money supply, and also fiscal policy, government decisions about spending and taxes.
So in a downturn, maybe lower interest rates and more government spending to boost demand. And the opposite in a boom.
That's the general idea, yes. Try to lean against the wind, moderate the extremes, provide stimulus when things are slow, maybe apply the brakes gently when things are getting overheated to prevent runaway inflation.
But Kanal also sounds a note of caution, right? It's not like we can just eliminate them entirely.
No, he makes that clear. There are just so many factors at play, those internal mechanisms, the potential for unpredictable external shocks, the sheer complexity of a modern global economy. It makes perfectly controlling the cycle incredibly difficult, probably impossible.
So managing the severity is maybe the more realistic goal.
I think that's fair to say. We can aim to make the recessions less deep and the booms less inflationary, but the underlying tendency for fluctuation seems pretty ingrained.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've really unpacked the idea of the business cycle today. It's this recurring, but definitely irregular pattern of economic ups and downs.
Right, driven by complex causes, both inside and outside the economy.
We've looked at those four phases: the expansion or boom, the recessionary turning point, the contraction or slump, and then the revival or recovery phase.
hmm And we've seen how these phases link together, often through these self-reinforcing mechanisms, like that accelerator-multiplier idea.
And we touched on the real-world impacts: unemployment, inflation, general uncertainty, and the tools we have, like monetary and fiscal policy, to try and mitigate them, even if we can't totally eliminate the cycle.
Exactly. So hopefully, for you listening, this gives you a much richer understanding when you hear about economic growth figures or recession warnings. It's not just random noise. There are underlying patterns and forces at work.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. We've talked about internal factors and external shocks and how irregular these cycles are. Thinking ahead, how might really big, maybe unexpected global changes, things like, I don't know, major climate events, huge leaps in AI, more pandemics, big geopolitical shifts,
Yeah.
how might those kinds of things make predicting or managing these economic ups and downs even more complicated in the future?
That's a fascinating question. It really underscores that the economy isn't static. It's constantly evolving, constantly facing new challenges and opportunities that might reshape these cycles we've been discussing.
Something to definitely keep thinking about. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.